He was a homeless Navy SEAL veteran who had spent most of his life believing that every home came with conditions. At 42, Logan Carter had no family waiting, no place to call his own, only an aging pickup truck, memories of the teammates he had lost, and Rex, the loyal German shepherd who had never left his side. Then, on a beautiful summer morning near McCarthy, Alaska, everything changed. While following an abandoned freight road in search of a free place to camp, the ground suddenly collapsed beneath Logan. He plunged into a deep washout, his leg pinned beneath a fallen branch as icy stream water began rising around him. With only minutes to escape, Rex dragged a dead limb toward him, then grabbed Logan's backpack as the crumbling bank gave way again, giving him the few desperate seconds he needed to pull himself free. Injured, soaked, and unable to make it back before evening, Logan followed Rex beyond the forgotten trail. Hidden among the spruce trees stood a century-old wagon cabin that should not have been there, and inside were letters, names, and a message left by strangers long dead, one that would force Logan to question everything he believed about family, loss, and what it truly means to have a home. Before we begin, if stories of faith, loyal dogs, hope, and second chances speak to your heart, please subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to welcome you to our community. Summer sunlight poured over the mountains outside McCarthy, Alaska, turning the distant ridges silver beneath a flawless blue sky. Spruce trees stirred in the clean morning air, and somewhere beyond them, cold mountain water moved over stone. Logan Carter woke in the driver's seat of an aging pickup truck with one boot pressed against the dashboard and a German shepherd breathing softly behind him. At 42, Logan still carried the frame of the U.S. Navy SEAL he had once been. 6'1", broad-shouldered and strong despite months of poor meals. His short, dark brown hair had begun graying at the temples, a neatly trimmed beard framed his weathered face, and a thin scar crossed his left eyebrow above blue-gray eyes that seemed permanently accustomed to watching doors. He wore the same red plaid flannel shirt beneath a worn brown canvas jacket, gray t-shirt, dark blue jeans, brown leather belt, and scuffed brown hiking boots he had worn for days. A scratched military watch remained on his wrist, although there was rarely anywhere he needed to be. Rex raised his head from the blanket behind the passenger seat. The 9-year-old male German shepherd had once been a military working dog, large and powerful even as silver began touching his muzzle. His black and tan sable coat carried a distinctive black saddle. His amber eyes were alert and unusually expressive, and a small scar marked the tip of his left ear. The only thing around his neck was an old brown leather collar with a brass tag. After Rex retired, Logan had adopted him. In some ways, they had both left military life together and never entirely figured out where civilians were supposed to put men and dogs like them. Logan understood homelessness better than he cared to admit. Long before he slept in a truck, he had learned how temporary a room could be. He had been found as an infant outside a children's shelter and passed through foster homes until, as a teenager, one family finally gave him a bedroom and called him their son. Years later, Logan understood that part of the reason they had taken him in was because they needed someone to shoulder responsibilities they did not want placed upon their biological son. Perhaps they had loved him. That uncertainty was worse than knowing they had not. From then on, Logan had never been completely certain where love ended and usefulness began. The military had seemed simpler. Nobody promised forever. Men simply proved, day after day, whether they would stand beside one another. That was where Logan met Daniel Mercer. Daniel would have been around Logan's age now. A lean, athletic man with short, light brown hair, warm brown eyes, a square jaw usually covered by a trace of stubble, and a grin that appeared most often when circumstances gave him absolutely no reason to smile. He had been stubbornly optimistic, irritatingly social, and one of the few men who could make Logan talk about his childhood without making him regret it afterward. Daniel used to joke that retirement would end with 2 small houses, 2 fishing boats they could not afford, and years spent complaining about their knees. Daniel never got his house. He never got old enough to complain about his knees either. Before one of their final missions together, Daniel had told Logan that if only one of them came home, the survivor had one responsibility: live enough for both of them. Don't turn surviving into a punishment. Logan had promised. Years later, sleeping in a pickup truck outside McCarthy, he sometimes wondered when exactly he had broken that promise. Civilian life had not collapsed all at once. That would have been easier to understand. Logan simply kept leaving. Jobs when co-workers became friends, apartments when neighbors started recognizing him, invitations when somebody became concerned enough to ask whether he was all right. Depending on people felt dangerous, and accepting kindness felt like signing a contract whose price had not yet been revealed. Eventually there were fewer jobs, less money, then no apartment. Only the truck. And Rex. That morning, Logan opened the last 2 packets of food he had bought the previous evening. He poured some into a battered metal bowl, hesitated, then quietly moved several pieces from his portion into Rex's. Rex approached, sniffed the bowl and looked up. "Eat." Rex remained still. Logan pointed. Nothing. Those amber eyes moved briefly toward the smaller portion in Logan's hand. Despite himself, Logan smiled. "Seriously?" Rex sat. Logan stared at him before returning several pieces to his own portion. "Fine. 50-50. Only then did Rex begin eating. Logan laughed softly, and for several seconds the old pickup did not feel quite as empty. Earlier that morning, a local man at a fuel stop had mentioned an abandoned freight route beyond the maintained trails. According to him, it eventually reached a flat patch of ground beside a mountain stream, where nobody cared if a man camped for several nights. Logan had listened because free was currently within his budget. By mid-morning, he parked near the beginning of the old route and pulled on his faded military backpack. Rex jumped down beside him. The wilderness opened ahead beneath brilliant sunlight. The old freight road was barely a road anymore, just 2 fading depressions disappearing between spruce, exposed roots, wild grass, and scattered stone. Logan paused before entering it. Places had always been easy for him to leave. Perhaps that was why empty roads felt safer than houses. "Come on, buddy." Rex moved ahead, occasionally turning to make sure Logan followed. They walked deeper into the mountains as McCarthy disappeared behind the trees. The air smelled of spruce and cold water. Somewhere below the old road, a stream ran unseen through the forest. After nearly an hour, Rex suddenly stopped. His ears lifted. Logan stopped too. "What is it?" Rex stared at the ground several feet ahead. Nothing moved. No animal emerged. The sky remained perfectly blue. Then Rex took one careful step backward. Logan frowned. The old dog almost never backed away from something he could see. A faint cracking sound came from beneath Logan's boots. Not ahead of him. Beneath him. The cracking beneath Logan's boots lasted less than a second. It was quiet enough to sound harmless, almost like a dry branch snapping somewhere below the trail. Then the earth dropped. Logan fell hard as a section of the abandoned freight road collapsed beneath him. Dirt, stones, roots, and broken branches followed, carrying him several feet into a narrow depression hidden beneath what had appeared to be solid ground. He struck the slope shoulder first, rolled, and stopped abruptly when his right leg became trapped beneath a heavy broken limb, dragged down in the collapse. Pain shot from his ankle toward his knee. Training took over before fear could. Logan checked his breathing, moved his arms, tested his left leg, then carefully tried the right. Nothing felt broken, but the limb pinning him refused to move. Above, Rex appeared at the fractured edge. Back. The German shepherd froze. Rex, back! Rex retreated several feet just as another strip of soil crumbled into the hole. Logan watched it fall and understood how deceptive the old road had been. Years of runoff and seasonal snowmelt had eaten through the soil underneath, leaving a thin crust strong enough to grow grass and look safe, but not strong enough to hold him. Then Logan heard running water. A small stream hidden uphill had been partially diverted by the collapse. Clear mountain water found the new opening and began pouring down through the exposed roots. Within moments, it surrounded Logan's boots. Of course, he muttered. Would have been too easy otherwise. The joke sounded almost normal. His heartbeat did not. He dug around his trapped leg with both hands. The soil was damp and loose, but the broken limb lay diagonally across his lower leg, wedged beneath a larger root. Logan pushed against it. Nothing. He changed position and pushed again until his shoulders trembled. The water reached his shins. Rex paced above, whining softly. "Stay back, buddy." The dog ignored the spirit of the command, while technically obeying it. He stayed away from the unstable edge, but moved rapidly along the intact ground, sniffing, searching, looking down from different angles. Water climbed over Logan's knees. Cold began penetrating his jeans. Logan knew the danger was no longer simply drowning. Cold water could strip strength from a body frighteningly fast. Once his hands stopped working properly, the problem would become much harder. For one unwanted instant, Daniel Mercer entered his mind. Not Daniel's death. His grin. "Don't turn surviving into a punishment." "Working on it," Logan whispered. Above him, Rex suddenly disappeared. "Rex?" No answer. Logan forced himself to keep digging. 30 seconds passed, maybe 40. The water rose toward his thighs. Then came the sound of something scraping across the ground. Rex reappeared several yards away, backing through the brush with his jaws clamped around a branch attached to a narrow deadfall. The old trunk was weathered and light enough to move, but long enough to reach the depression. Rex pulled, released, repositioned his jaws, then pulled again. Logan understood. "That's it. Bring it." Rex dragged until one end slid over the stable portion of the bank and dropped toward Logan. Logan caught it. He wedged the trunk against an exposed root and used it as a lever beneath the branch, pinning his leg. The first attempt accomplished nothing. The second moved it barely an inch. The third gave him enough. Logan twisted his boot sideways and ripped his leg free. Pain flashed through his ankle, but it moved. That was enough. The water was approaching his waist when Logan began climbing. He used roots rather than loose soil, testing each hold before trusting his weight. His wet clothes dragged against him. His right leg protested every movement. 3 feet from the top, he reached for a thick root. The bank broke. Logan dropped. His chest slammed against the slope and his fingers tore through loose earth. For one terrible instant, he felt himself sliding toward the water again. Something jerked his backpack violently backward. Rex had seized the heavy shoulder strap near Logan's upper back. The dog planted all 4 paws on solid ground and pulled. He was not lifting Logan. He could not. But the resistance slowed Logan's fall long enough for Logan to drive his forearm over the intact edge. "Hold!" Rex growled through the strap. Logan found another root, pushed with his good leg, and dragged his chest onto solid ground. A final effort brought his hips over the edge. Then he rolled away from the collapse. For several seconds, Logan simply lay beneath the blue Alaska sky, coughing and trying to breathe. Rex released the backpack and rushed to him, sniffing his face, chest, arms, then returning anxiously to his face. "I'm here." Rex pressed closer. Logan raised both hands and held the dog's head. The small scar on Rex's left ear passed beneath his thumb. Logan remembered hospital corridors, empty bunks, folded flags, phone calls he had postponed because he had never known what words could possibly make loss smaller. Too many times, gratitude had arrived after goodbye. He pressed his forehead against Rex's. "Thank you, buddy." Rex licked his cheek. Logan laughed once, exhausted. Yeah, ruin the moment. When he finally stood, his right ankle supported weight, but hurt badly. His jeans and boots were soaked. The sun was still bright, but in Alaska's mountains, clear weather did not make wet clothing harmless once evening temperatures began falling. Logan looked back toward the route they had traveled. Returning to the truck would take hours even without an injured ankle. "We need somewhere dry." Rex lifted his nose. The dog turned toward dense spruce away from the old road and began sniffing the air. Then he walked several yards into the trees. "Wrong direction, Rex." Rex stopped and looked back. Logan knew that posture. During their working years, Rex had worn the same focused stillness whenever scent or instinct had given him information Logan did not yet possess. Rex continued into the trees. Logan found a sturdy fallen branch, tested it as a walking stick, and followed. For nearly 20 minutes they moved slowly through spruce and waist-high brush. Logan's ankle worsened with every step. Twice he considered turning around. Then Rex disappeared through a curtain of young trees. A bark came from beyond them. Logan pushed through and stopped. Standing in a sunlit clearing was an enormous old wooden freight wagon with no wheels, its long weathered body resting permanently on a fieldstone foundation. A reinforced wooden roof covered it. Moss clung to dark timber walls. Several steps led to a narrow door, and an aged metal chimney rose above the roof. It should not have been there, not this far beyond the abandoned route, not this intact. Rex stood beside the steps, watching him. Less than an hour earlier, the dog had helped pull Logan away from what might have become his grave. Now, impossibly, Rex had led him to a front door. For several seconds, Logan remained at the edge of the clearing, leaning heavily on his makeshift walking stick. The wagon cabin stood beneath the Alaska sun, like something the wilderness had forgotten to erase. Rex waited beside the steps, his amber eyes fixed on Logan. "All right," Logan murmured. "You found it. Let's see if it wants company." He crossed the clearing slowly, favoring his injured ankle. Up close, the structure was stranger still. The long wooden body retained the proportions of an old freight wagon, but its wheels had been removed, and the frame rested securely on a fieldstone foundation. Someone had later reinforced the roof and added a narrow door, a metal chimney, and 3 simple steps. Moss covered parts of the weathered timber, yet the walls remained remarkably straight. Logan tested the door before pushing it inward. The hinges complained, but they moved. The interior smelled of old wood, dust, and cold iron. Sunlight entered through a small window, revealing a narrow bunk at one end, a folding table secured against the wall, handmade shelves, storage compartments, and a long wooden bench polished smooth by years of use. Near the center stood a compact cast-iron stove. Rex entered behind him, sniffed the floor thoroughly, then sneezed. Logan glanced down. "Good. Glad one of us conducted a professional inspection." Rex ignored him. Beside the stove, Logan noticed words carved directly into a timber support. The letters were crude, but deliberate. One instruction indicated that dry wood was stored beneath the rear platform, Another described how to open the stove damper. A third pointed toward a spring beyond the eastern side of the cabin. Near the door, someone had even carved a simple method for lifting the hinge if winter swelling caused it to stick. None of it was decoration. They were instructions. For strangers. That realization stayed with Logan as he found several pieces of dry wood exactly where the carving said they would be. He inspected the stove and chimney as carefully as possible before lighting a small fire. Soon warmth began pushing the chill from the narrow room. Logan removed his wet canvas jacket and boots, then examined his ankle. It was swollen but stable. He cleaned several scrapes with supplies from his backpack and wrapped the ankle tightly. Nothing suggested a fracture. Painful, yes. Useless, no. Rex settled beside the stove. "You almost got us killed today," Logan said. One amber eye opened. Logan considered that. Fair point. That was mostly me. The eye closed again. As his clothes dried, Logan began examining the cabin more carefully. The construction was practical rather than beautiful. Every inch had purpose. Hooks had been carved from hardwood. Shelves fit precisely between support beams. The bunk contained storage beneath it. Whoever had lived here had understood scarcity. When Logan placed a hand on the long bench to stand, the board shifted. He frowned. One end moved differently from the rest. Logan knelt and found a small wooden catch hidden underneath. Releasing it opened a shallow compartment built into the bench itself. Inside lay a rectangular bundle wrapped in dark oilcloth. Logan hesitated before touching it. He had entered the cabin because he needed shelter, not because anything inside belonged to him. But the careful wrapping suggested preservation rather than concealment. He lifted the bundle onto the table and unfolded one corner. Paper. Dozens of pages. Letters. A narrow journal lay underneath them. Logan opened it carefully. The first pages identified William Bennett, a frontier freight hauler who appeared to have been in his late 40s when the journal was written. A faded photograph tucked between two pages showed a broad, sturdy man with sun-weathered skin, dark hair beginning to gray, a thick but carefully maintained mustache, and the heavy hands of someone accustomed to tools and freight. His expression was stern until Logan noticed the faint upward line at one corner of his mouth. Beside William stood Margaret Bennett, his wife, a woman in her early 40s with a slender but resilient build, fair skin weathered by frontier life, brown hair pinned neatly behind her head, and calm eyes that gave the impression of someone who rarely wasted words or food. Their son, Thomas Bennett, appeared about 19, tall and lean, with short brown hair, an open, youthful face, and shoulders just beginning to broaden into adulthood. Logan began reading. William had once hauled freight along the route Logan had followed that morning. When damage left the wagon beyond practical repair, the Bennetts removed its wheels, placed the body on stone, and gradually turned it into a home. The journal contained no buried fortune, gunfights, or grand frontier legends. Mostly, it contained supper. Margaret saved enough sugar to bake something resembling a cake. Thomas spent an afternoon helping William patch the roof and complained about the work until rain arrived that night, proving his father right. They counted firewood, repaired boots, celebrated a successful hunt, argued over chores, sat beside the stove during cold evenings. Logan found himself smiling at an entry in which William complained that Thomas could repair a wagon axle, but somehow remained incapable of hanging a coat on the hook beside the door. Ordinary people. An ordinary family. Somehow that made the pages harder to put down. Then Logan found a letter folded separately near the back. It was addressed to Thomas. The date placed it shortly before the young man was to leave Alaska and enter military service. William wrote nothing about glory, nothing about becoming a hero. His concern was painfully simple. Whatever Thomas saw away from home, whatever years changed inside him, his father hoped he would never believe he had to return as the same young man who had left. He only wanted Thomas to remember that somewhere in the world there would still be a door he could open, a place where he did not have to earn the right to come home. Logan stopped reading. The fire cracked softly. Suddenly he could see Daniel sitting across from him years earlier, eating terrible food and describing those imaginary neighboring houses they would buy after retirement. Daniel had insisted his would have a bigger porch. Logan had told him he would probably burn it down trying to grill. He remembered Daniel laughing. Not the mission that took him, not the silence afterward. The laugh. Logan stared at the letter until the words blurred. Rex rose from beside the stove, crossed the narrow floor, and rested his silvering muzzle on Logan's knee. Logan placed one hand between the dog's ears. Neither moved for a long time. Outside, evening light slowly turned golden between the spruce trees. Inside the forgotten wagon, Logan looked again at the photograph of William, Margaret, and Thomas. For years, remembering Daniel had meant remembering someone who died. That night, for the first time, Logan remembered someone who had lived. Night settled slowly over the Alaska mountains, but Logan remained at the folding table long after the last golden light disappeared from the small window. The fire inside the cast-iron stove burned steadily, and the Bennett letters lay open before him. Rex had returned to his place near the stove. Logan should have slept. His ankle throbbed beneath the bandage, exhaustion weighed on his shoulders, and tomorrow would require a long walk back to the truck. Instead, he unfolded another page. This letter was written years after the entries he had read earlier. Thomas had already left home. William and Margaret were preparing to leave the wagon cabin themselves. William's handwriting had become less steady. He wrote that Margaret's health was no longer suited to another hard winter so far from town. The freight route was changing, fewer wagons passed through, and there was no practical reason for two aging people to remain. Logan expected the final lines to describe locking the door. They did not. William had written that the cabin would remain open. He left dry wood beneath the rear platform, basic tools near the door, and instructions beside the stove. The reason was simple. Someone else might eventually need them. Then Logan reached a sentence written darker than the rest, as though William had pressed the pencil firmly into the paper. If this place helps you, leave something that may help the next person. Logan read it twice. He looked toward the carved instructions beside the stove. Until that moment, he had assumed the markings belonged to William. Now he noticed differences. Some letters were deep and angular. Others were shallow. One instruction appeared to have been carved with a narrow blade, another with something broader. The messages had not been left by one person. Logan took the lantern from the table and examined the cabin. Near the doorframe, almost hidden beneath decades of wear, he found initials followed by a year. Farther down, another name had been scratched beneath the bunk. On the side of a shelf was another date. Different hands, different decades. He returned to the letters. Several later pages had apparently been added by travelers who discovered the cabin after the Bennetts left. One man wrote that he replaced a broken hinge after spending 3 nights there waiting for an injured horse to recover. Another recorded repairing a section of roof after finding the cabin during heavy weather. Someone else had left 2 blankets. Logan looked toward the old tin cup hanging beside the stove. Another entry mentioned leaving a cup. He stared at it for a surprisingly long time. The object was worthless. That was precisely what made it important. Nobody had placed it there for recognition. No plaque carried the donor's name. Nobody could know whether the next traveler would arrive tomorrow, 10 years later, or never. Someone had simply thought, another person might need this. Logan leaned back. That idea should not have been difficult to understand. For him, it was. Almost every roof he remembered had come with conditions. Foster homes had rules and expiration dates. The family that once called him son had needed another pair of shoulders beneath the weight of their household. Maybe they had loved him. Logan had never been able to untangle that question. Later, the Navy needed discipline, endurance, competence. Logan had willingly given all three because his teammates gave the same things back. Civilian employment was even simpler. Work and get paid. Stop working, and the relationship ended. Useful meant welcome. Useless meant temporary. Logan had lived so long by that equation that he had stopped recognizing it as an equation at all. But William Bennett could gain nothing from him. Neither could Margaret. The strangers who repaired this roof were gone. Whoever left the blankets would never know Logan had slept beneath one. Whoever repaired the chimney could never receive his thanks. And still, because of them, he was sitting beside a fire instead of limping through cold mountain darkness in wet clothes. Logan rubbed both hands over his face. You know what bothers me about this? Rex lifted his head. They're terrible at transactions. Rex stared. No return on investment. No follow-up. No way to collect. The dog's ears tilted slightly. Logan gave a tired smile. Exactly. Reckless business model. He placed the letter carefully back on the table. The humor faded. For years, Logan had told himself that people left. It was one of those beliefs that eventually became useful because it explained everything. If someone disappointed him, he had expected it. If a friendship weakened, he had predicted it. If a relationship might become important, he could leave first and congratulate himself for avoiding the inevitable. He had called that survival. Perhaps sometimes it had been fear wearing survival's uniform. The thought made him uncomfortable enough that he stood and immediately regretted it when his ankle protested. Yeah. Rex watched him limp toward the stove. Logan added one piece of wood, then stopped. There were only several pieces remaining in the dry stack. His first instinct was practical. Use what he needed. Then he looked at William's sentence again. He placed the piece back. One might be needed tomorrow by somebody colder than him. Later, Logan spread his faded blanket on the floor. The warmest position was directly beside the stove, and Rex settled there first. Logan lay slightly farther away, using his canvas jacket beneath his head. Within a minute, Rex stood. The dog circled once and lowered himself tightly against Logan's side, surrendering the warmer spot without ceremony. You had the good seat. Rex rested his silvering muzzle against Logan's ribs. Logan pulled half the blanket over him. The cabin became quiet. His hand settled against Rex's thick fur. The dog had known Logan when he had a uniform, a team, a purpose, and people waiting for him. Rex had also known him without those things. He had slept beside Logan in cheap rooms, the pickup truck, and places neither of them remembered fondly. Rex had never once asked which version of Logan deserved loyalty. The realization hurt in a way Logan had not expected. Maybe love was not always someone promising never to leave. Maybe sometimes it was simply someone choosing to stay today without demanding proof that you deserved tomorrow. Logan stared at the dark ceiling. For years he had believed everyone eventually left him. But inside a home built for strangers, with Rex breathing quietly against his side, another possibility finally became impossible to ignore. Maybe Logan had become so afraid of being left behind that he had spent half his life leaving first. Morning entered the wagon cabin as a pale ribbon of sunlight across the floorboards. Logan woke with Rex pressed against his side and, for several seconds, forgot that neither the ceiling above him nor the warmth around him belonged to them. His ankle had stiffened overnight, though the swelling had not worsened. Logan fed Rex, ate sparingly, rekindled the stove, and returned to the Bennett papers before preparing for the walk back. He told himself he wanted to make sure everything was properly wrapped. The truth was simpler. He was not ready to stop listening. Near the end of William's journal, Logan found a sentence he had overlooked the night before. "The names of those who come after us belong where they rested." Logan frowned. "That's unnecessarily mysterious, William." Rex, occupied with investigating the underside of the bunk, offered no opinion. Logan read the surrounding paragraph, but it provided little explanation. William mentioned travelers, shelter, and preserving memory, then moved abruptly to repairing a window before winter. Logan closed the journal. A scratching sound came from behind him. Rex had pushed his muzzle beneath the narrow bunk and was sniffing insistently along the floor. He moved several inches, stopped, returned, and sniffed again. "What did you find?" Logan knelt beside him. At first he saw only old boards and dust. Then morning light revealed a thin, straight gap running along one plank. Too straight. Logan ran his fingertips across it. The board moved. He carefully worked it upward and discovered a shallow compartment beneath the floor. Inside rested a rectangular metal box, its surface dark with age but surprisingly free of heavy corrosion. Logan lifted it onto the table. The lid resisted, then opened with a dry, metallic sound. There was no money, no gold, nothing anyone would call treasure at first glance. A silver-colored pocket watch lay wrapped in cloth. Its case bore the initials W.B. Logan recognized William immediately. Beneath it were faded photographs of the Bennetts at different ages, several family certificates, property documents, and a hand-drawn map showing the old freight route winding through the surrounding mountains. At the bottom was a narrow ledger. Logan opened it. Names. Dozens of them. Each entry included a date and sometimes a few words. Roof patched, left dry beans, replaced hinge, 2 nights, horse injured, thank you. Some entries were decades apart. Others came only months after the previous visitor. Handwriting changed from elegant script to hurried pencil marks. Certain pages contained nothing but a name and a year. Logan slowly understood William's strange sentence. These were the people who had slept here. The wagon cabin had not merely survived after the Bennetts left. It had continued living through strangers. One traveler found shelter because another had repaired the roof. Someone stayed warm because a person years earlier had left an axe. Another drank from the spring because someone had carved directions into the wall. Nobody had owned the whole story. Each person had carried a small piece of it forward. Near the final pages, Logan found another folded letter in William's handwriting. It appeared older than the others, the strokes shakier, as though written late in his life. William explained that if the wagon remained standing after he and Margaret were gone, whoever discovered the papers should resist the temptation to claim the place, simply because everyone who built it had disappeared. A roof, William wrote, became more valuable when it sheltered someone who had nowhere else to go. He asked only that the cabin be protected, not polished into something unrecognizable, not emptied for souvenirs. Protected, so that someday a tired traveler, someone lost, injured, cold, or simply uncertain where to go next, could still open the door. Logan lowered the letter. Lost. Injured. Uncertain where to go next. He almost laughed. Little on the nose, William. Rex turned toward him. Morning sunlight crossed the dog's face, illuminating the silver spreading around his muzzle. Logan's smile disappeared. He had noticed the gray before, of course. He knew Rex was 9. He knew German shepherds did not measure time generously. Yet somewhere inside him, Logan had treated Rex as permanent. perhaps because he needed one thing to be. The dog had survived a life most animals never knew. He had left military service, adjusted to cheap motels and long drives, slept inside Logan's truck without complaint, eaten whatever Logan could afford, and yesterday had refused to abandon him beneath a collapsing road. One day Rex would not be there. The thought struck Logan with unexpected force. His instinct was immediate and familiar. Do not think about it. That was how he had handled Daniel. That was how he handled everyone. Prepare for loss early enough, and perhaps loss could not surprise you. Except it had never worked. Logan crouched beside Rex and wrapped both arms around the dog's neck. Rex stood quietly, then leaned his weight against Logan. Daniel's voice returned from years ago. Don't turn surviving into a punishment. Logan had once interpreted survival as endurance. Keep breathing. Keep moving. Need nothing. But that was not what Daniel had asked of him. William's cabin had survived for a century because people cared enough to maintain it. Maybe humans' lives worked the same way. Maybe survival was not supposed to mean carrying everything alone. Logan scratched behind Rex's scarred left ear. Maybe we should find somewhere to stay before we run out of time. Rex licked his wrist. Not the truck, Logan added. The tail moved once against the floor. Logan laughed softly. Glad we agree. Before leaving, he photographed the ledger, William's letter, the map, photographs, and documents with his phone. He recorded the cabin's approximate location and marked recognizable terrain on his own map. Then he returned every object exactly where he had found it, wrapped the papers again in oilcloth, placed the metal box beneath the floor, and lowered the plank. Nothing belonged in his backpack. This place had survived more than a century because people had resisted taking more than they needed. Logan extinguished the stove, left the remaining dry wood untouched, and opened the door. Bright Alaska sunlight filled the cabin. Rex stepped outside first. Logan paused at the threshold and looked back once. Yesterday, he had entered because he needed shelter. Today, he was leaving with something far more inconvenient. Responsibility. He closed the door gently and followed Rex toward the old freight road. For the first time in years, Logan was not walking back toward town simply because he needed to survive another day. He was going back because tomorrow he had something worth doing. By the time Logan and Rex reached McCarthy again, the mountains behind them looked almost ordinary. Logan knew better now. Somewhere beyond those sunlit ridges stood a little wooden structure carrying more than a century of names. 2 days later, after resting his ankle and organizing the photographs on his phone, Logan contacted Sarah Collins, a local historical researcher whose name he received through a small preservation office. Sarah was 39, about 5'6", slender without appearing fragile, with shoulder-length chestnut-brown hair usually tucked behind one ear, hazel eyes, lightly freckled fair skin, and the practical posture of someone accustomed to spending as much time around dusty records and forgotten buildings as behind a desk. She dressed simply in a pale work shirt, dark hiking trousers, weathered boots, and a lightweight outdoor jacket. Sarah was friendly but cautious with extraordinary claims. Years of examining supposed historic discoveries that turned out to be abandoned sheds, replicas, or family legends had taught her that enthusiasm should follow evidence, not precede it. When Logan first described the structure, Sarah assumed he had found an old mining shelter. Then he showed her the photographs. She stopped scrolling. Go back. Logan did. Sarah enlarged the image, showing the wagon body resting on stone. Another one? He showed her William's journal, the family photographs, the hand-drawn freight map, then the ledger. Sarah's expression changed. Did you remove anything? No. Nothing. I took pictures. Sarah looked at him for a moment, then nodded with visible approval. Good. Several days later, Logan returned to the old freight road with Rex, Sarah, and a small preservation team. Logan's ankle was still tender, but manageable. He guided them around the collapsed section rather than attempting the dangerous route from before. Late in the afternoon, Rex reached the clearing first. Sarah stepped through the spruce behind him and stopped. Nobody spoke. The wagon cabin stood exactly as Logan had left it, sunlight touching the moss-covered roof and weathered walls. For Logan, seeing it again felt strangely different. The first time, it had been shelter. Now it felt like returning with witnesses for people who had waited a century to be remembered. Sarah approached slowly. "My God," she whispered. The following weeks turned possibility into evidence. Old land records confirmed the Bennett name. Freight documents showed William Bennett had worked along a regional transport route during the early 20th century. Archived records placed Margaret and Thomas with him. Survey maps revealed that the freight corridor had gradually fallen out of use as newer transportation routes developed, and later maps stopped showing sections of it altogether. The wagon cabin had not been deliberately hidden. The world had simply moved away from it. Yet the discovery that affected Sarah most was the ledger. She sat at the folding table one afternoon, wearing thin archival gloves, turning pages while Logan repaired a loose exterior step. "These people kept it alive," she said when he came inside. Logan nodded. "For people they didn't know." Sarah looked around the narrow room. "That may be more important than how old it is." Eventually, preservation officials and members of the local community agreed that the wagon cabin should remain part of the region's historical landscape rather than become a commercial attraction. Access would be controlled enough to protect the fragile site, while its story and records could be documented for the public. Logan volunteered to help with stabilization. He planned to stay 3 days. 3 became 10. 10 became several weeks. Under the guidance of preservation workers, Logan learned how to replace damaged timber without erasing original tool marks, reinforce weakened steps, distinguish old repairs worth preserving from modern damage, and treat wood without making a century-old wagon look newly manufactured. He liked the work. That surprised him. Restoration demanded patience. You could not bully old wood into becoming new again. You had to understand what remained strong, support what had weakened, and replace only what could no longer carry its share. One afternoon, Sarah found Logan fitting a repaired tread, while Rex slept in the shade nearby. "You're good at this. I can follow instructions. That's not the same thing." Logan shrugged. Sarah did not push. She had learned quickly that Logan spoke more when silence was allowed to exist around him. So they worked. Eventually he began telling stories. Not important ones. Daniel Mercer singing badly during long rides. Daniel losing an argument with a coffee machine. Daniel once insisting he knew a shortcut that added nearly 40 minutes to their trip. "He couldn't sing?" Sarah asked. "He believed volume could compensate for accuracy." From the shade, Rex lifted his head and tilted it. Logan pointed at him. "You remember?" Rex's ears shifted. Logan laughed. Then the sound faded, not into sadness, but surprise. He had just spoken about Daniel for several minutes, without arriving at the end of Daniel's life. For once, memory had stopped before becoming grief. Sarah noticed, but said nothing. A month later, she told Logan that a local preservation organization needed a seasonal maintenance worker. The job involved trails, historic structures, basic repairs, and plenty of work outdoors. "You should apply." Logan's answer came automatically. "No." Sarah raised an eyebrow. He almost laughed. The refusal felt embarrassingly familiar. "What's the catch?" A paycheck. I mean after that. You show up again. The simplicity of it unsettled him. Logan looked toward Rex. The dog was asleep beside the wagon cabin, silver muzzle resting between his paws. Fine, Logan said. Sarah smiled. That sounded painful. It was. He got the job. Summer began leaning toward autumn. Logan showed up the next morning, then the next. Weeks became months. For the first time in years, leaving stopped being his answer to becoming known. With regular income, he eventually found a modest one-bedroom rental outside town. Nothing impressive. Weathered siding, a tiny porch, an old kitchen, and one wide window facing the mountains. The landlord handed Logan the key. He stood outside longer than necessary. A key had weight when you had spent years without one. Rex did not share his hesitation. The German shepherd walked through the open door, inspected the kitchen, bedroom, and window, circled twice on the wooden floor, then lay down in a rectangle of afternoon sunlight. Logan remained at the threshold. So you've decided? Rex's tail struck the floor. Once. Twice. Logan smiled and stepped inside. He closed the door behind him. And for the first time in years, the sound did not make him wonder when he would have to leave. A year later, the wagon cabin still stood among the spruce outside McCarthy, weathered rather than polished, its old knife marks, cast-iron stove, folding table, and generations of carved instructions preserved beneath another clear Alaska sky. Logan Carter had changed too, although most of the changes could not be photographed. He still wore his red plaid flannel beneath the same brown canvas jacket whenever the weather cooled. The scar through his left eyebrow remained. His pickup still complained on cold mornings. He still preferred silence to crowded rooms. But now there was a key in his pocket that opened his own front door. Steady preservation work on his calendar. And people who had gradually learned that when they called him, he might actually answer. That last part had been harder than finding employment. Logan began with the families of men he had served beside. He had avoided several of them for years, convincing himself that his presence would reopen wounds. Eventually, he understood that he had partly been protecting himself. The hardest call was to Eleanor Mercer, Daniel's mother. Eleanor was 71, a small woman with silver-white hair cut neatly to her jaw, soft brown eyes remarkably similar to Daniel's, and fine lines around her mouth that deepened whenever she smiled. Age had made her movements slower but not fragile. She carried herself with quiet steadiness, the kind built after surviving grief that never truly disappears. Daniel had inherited his humor from her, along with his habit of making other people comfortable before admitting when he himself was hurting. Logan visited her during the winter. For several minutes after Eleanor opened the door, neither knew what to say. Then she hugged him. Logan nearly broke. They sat at her kitchen table with coffee between them. At first, Logan spoke carefully, as though Daniel's name might shatter something. Then Eleanor asked, "Did he really sing as badly as he claimed?" Logan stared at her. "Worse." She laughed. So Logan told her. He told her about long drives during which Daniel massacred every song he knew. He told her about the fishing plan, the imaginary neighboring houses, and Daniel's absolute confidence that he would own the better porch despite having no idea how to build one. Eleanor laughed until tears ran down her face. Then she cried. So did Logan. But something important happened at that kitchen table. Daniel did not become less dead. The loss did not become fair. Yet for the first time, Logan understood that remembering someone did not require trapping them inside the worst moment of their life. Daniel had died once. Logan had been making him die again every time he remembered him. After that visit, Logan began helping where he could. Through people connected to his work and the local community, he met veterans struggling with employment, temporary housing, or the strange disorientation of civilian life. Logan never pretended to have answers. Sometimes he helped someone prepare for a maintenance job. Sometimes he passed along the number of a landlord willing to consider an applicant with imperfect history. Sometimes he simply bought coffee and listened. He could not save everyone. The wagon cabin had never promised that either. It offered one roof, one fire, one night, enough to help someone reach tomorrow. By late summer, Rex was 10. Silver had spread farther across the German shepherd's muzzle, and his pace on steep ground had slowed. His amber eyes remained sharp, and he still insisted on walking ahead whenever Logan allowed it, although Logan now chose easier routes without mentioning why. One clear afternoon, they returned to the wagon cabin. The mountain stood blue and silver beyond the trees. Warm sunlight moved through the spruce, and the restored steps held firmly beneath Logan's boots. They sat together outside the door. Logan reached inside his canvas jacket and removed an old photograph. His SEAL team. Daniel stood among them, younger than Logan was now, wearing that familiar grin. Other faces surrounded him. Some were gone too. Years ago, Logan could not look at the photograph without seeing absence. Empty chairs, unanswered phones, funerals. Now he saw something else. Men who had once stood beside him. Men who had laughed, argued, complained, shared meals, carried weight, and made terrible jokes when nobody should have been joking. People who had stayed for as long as life allowed them to. Logan returned the photograph to his pocket. Inside the cabin, he opened the storage cupboard and placed a clean wool blanket on the shelf. Beside it, he left waterproof matches and several sealed packages of dry food, approved for the shelter supply. No name. No note asking for gratitude. No way to know who would use them. Rex watched from the doorway. Apparently, I've adopted William's terrible business model. Rex's tail moved once. Logan smiled. Before leaving, he examined the old carved instructions. Generations of hands had written practical things: water, wood, hinges, smoke, repairs. Logan took out his pocket knife. He hesitated. Then, in a small, unused section of timber, he carved 6 words. You made it this far. Rest a while. He ran his thumb gently across them. That was enough. Outside, the afternoon had begun leaning toward evening. Rex descended the steps carefully, and Logan followed. They walked down the old freight route together, neither moving quickly. Logan no longer needed to. For most of his life, he had believed loss proved love was temporary and therefore dangerous. Now he understood something more difficult. Some people left because life gave them no choice. Some were only meant to walk beside you for part of the road. But love did not become meaningless because it ended. William Bennett had left shelter for a man he could never know. Daniel had left Logan a reason to do more than survive. And Rex had stayed beside him long enough for Logan to understand that being loved had never required him to remain useful, fearless, or unbroken. The trees opened gradually toward the valley. Behind them, the wagon cabin remained among the spruce, waiting for whoever might need it next. Ahead was McCarthy, work tomorrow, food in the kitchen, a key in Logan's pocket, and a small house with a sunny window Rex had already claimed as his own. Logan looked down at the old dog walking beside him. Come on, buddy. Let's go home. Rex's tail moved gently. Together they continued down the mountain road as the late summer sun stretched their shadows ahead of them. And this time, at the end of the road, there was a home waiting. Maybe the true miracle was not that Logan found the wagon cabin, but that God led him to it when he needed a reason to keep going. Sometimes God's answers come quietly, through an open door, a stranger's kindness, or a faithful dog who refuses to leave our side. Life will bring loss, but love is never wasted. Whatever kindness you receive, leave a little behind for the person who comes after you. If this story touched your heart, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide you safely home, wherever you are watching from.